The envelope landed on Lee Tae-won's desk with barely a sound.
I am leaving.
Zoe Bennett had rehearsed this moment 47 times in her bathroom mirror. She knew exactly what she was going to say, exactly how she was going to stand, exactly how long she was going to hold eye contact before she turned and walked out of his life for good. 6 years of organizing his empire, managing his threats, rescheduling his wars. 6 years of knowing when he hadn't slept by the way he held his jaw. 6 years of caring about a man who treated emotion like a liability. She was done. Tae-won didn't look at the envelope. He looked at her. That was his thing. Most people flinched when Lee Tae-won looked at them. The kind of man who built South Korea's most feared criminal organization before 30, who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Zoe had watched grown men dissolve under that stare. She'd watched decorated police commissioners forget their own names. She just looked back. "What is this?" he said. "Not a question. My resignation." She kept her voice even. Professional. The way she'd trained herself to be around him for 6 years. 2 weeks' notice, though I've already briefed Sun Ae on everything she'll need. You won't lose a single day of productivity. Something moved across his face. Gone before she could name it. He didn't touch the envelope. "Sit down." "I'd rather stand." Silence stretched between them. Tae-won leaned back in his chair with the slow, deliberate ease of a man who had never once been rushed by anything or anyone. His eyes didn't leave her face. "You want to tell me the real reason? The letter covers it." 6 years, he said. "And the reason you give me is that you want a different life." His voice was flat. "Try again." Zoe had promised herself she wouldn't do this. Wouldn't stand here and have this conversation because this conversation led nowhere. She'd mapped it out. She'd seen every version of how it ended, and none of them ended well for her. "I'm 29 years old," she said. "I've spent 6 years making sure your world runs. I'm good at it. I know that. But I want a life that belongs to me, and I can't build that here." He said nothing. "This isn't a negotiation, Tae-won. I'm not asking for a raise. I know what you're not asking for." The way he said it stopped her. Zoe held his gaze a second longer than she meant to, then did what she'd promised herself she'd do. She nodded once. Walked to the door. Kept her spine straight and her steps measured and her face completely composed, the way she'd taught herself to be, the way surviving 6 years in his orbit required her to be. She made it all the way to the door before he spoke again. "You'll come back Monday." She almost turned around. Almost. "Good night, Tae-won." She left without looking back. In the elevator, she exhaled for the first time in 20 minutes. And she told herself the hard part was over. She was wrong. If you've never seen Lee Tae-won want something he couldn't immediately have, you have no idea what you're looking at when it starts. It doesn't look like desperation. It doesn't look like longing. It looks like calm. It looks like control. It looks like a man who has every situation managed. And then you start noticing the details. Monday morning, a new project landed on Zoe's desk. High complexity. Time sensitive. Needed her specifically because she had the background. She went to Min Suk, Tae-won's right-hand man, a broad-shouldered, permanently unreadable man who had worked beside Tae-won for 12 years and who possessed the unique talent of knowing everything while appearing to know nothing. "Did this actually come in over the weekend?" she asked, setting the folder down in front of him. Min Suk glanced at it. Looked up. "It came through his office." "That's not what I asked." Min Suk looked at the folder again with an expression that was very close to nothing, but not quite. "The project is real." Zoe stared at him for a long moment. "Right." She did the project. It took 9 days. She was thorough, because she was always thorough, because she'd built her entire professional identity on the fact that when Zoe Bennett was assigned something she finished it completely and perfectly and without complaint. On day 10, a second project appeared. She went back to Min-suk. He was suspiciously busy with paperwork. Min-suk. The project is real, he said, before she could speak. I haven't asked you anything yet. I know. She leaned against the doorframe and crossed her arms. He's doing it on purpose. Min-suk set down his pen. Looked at her with that careful, measured expression he used when he was being honest without technically saying anything. He didn't take the resignation well. He signed the letter. Min-suk agreed, and then spent Saturday creating work that only you could do. Zoe closed her eyes briefly. That's unbelievable. He's quite creative when motivated. She left the folder on Min-suk's desk and walked down the hall toward Taewon's office. She knocked once. Walked in without waiting because she had never in 6 years waited outside his door. Taewon was on a call. He looked at her, raised one finger, finished the call in under 30 seconds, and set his phone down. The Yongin project, she said. What about it? Was it real when you assigned it or did you build it over the weekend? A pause. Not long enough to be guilt. Not short enough to be nothing. It's real now, he said. That is such a specific answer. Sit down, Zoe. Stop telling me to sit down. For the first time in memory, something close to amusement crossed Lee Taewon's face. Not a smile. He didn't really do those. Just a slight shift at the corner of his mouth that she'd learned over 6 years meant he found something genuinely interesting. Your 2 weeks aren't up, he said. My 2 weeks are a courtesy. You know that. Then extend the courtesy. He picked up a document from his desk and turned his attention to it with the finality of a man closing a door. The Yongin project needs your oversight through completion. Zoe stood there watching him read and felt the specific, infuriating exhaustion of being managed by someone who was so much better at it than almost everyone else on Earth. And when Yongin is done, she said. He turned a page. We'll see. She left. She was furious. And underneath the fury, in a place she refused to acknowledge, she felt something dangerously close to hope. This would be a good moment to remind you that Zoe Bennett had not survived 6 years in Lee Taewon's world by being naive. She was not a woman who misread situations. She was not a woman who confused professional proximity with personal feeling. She had watched other employees make that mistake. She'd watched assistants develop attachments and leave quietly. She'd watched men and women both project warmth onto a man who was fundamentally built from calculation and cold. She knew what he was. She had also spent 6 years sitting in a front row seat to who he was when the performance dropped. The way he quietly rerouted money to the families of employees who died in accidents without ever announcing it. The way he ended contracts with suppliers who mistreated their workers, not with a speech, just a single call and a simple sentence. The way he remembered every name. Not just the executives. Every name. Security guards. Kitchen staff. Cleaners. He never made a show of it. He just knew. That was the problem. It was so much easier to leave a monster. It was significantly harder to leave a man who was monstrous in some ways and devastatingly human in others. She was still working through the Yongin project on a Thursday afternoon when her phone buzzed. It was Alicia. You actually still there? I thought you resigned. Still finishing the handover, Zoe typed back. 3 seconds. Zoe. Baby. Get out of that building. It's professional. I'm almost done. You've been almost done for 2 weeks. He's doing it on purpose and you know it. Zoe set her phone face down on her desk. She knew. She also knew that the Yongin project was genuinely complex and she was genuinely the best person for it and she genuinely didn't like leaving things unfinished. Those things were all true at the same time. They sat beside the other true thing, which was that Taewon was using every single one of those facts like tools. And before she finished constructing the thought, her office phone rang. She already knew who it was. "My office," Taewon said. "Bring the Yongin file." She grabbed the file. Walked down the hall. Opened his door. And stopped. There were flowers on his desk. Not an arrangement, not a bouquet. A single stem in a narrow glass vase. Pale yellow. The exact color of the flowers she'd once mentioned, in passing, in a conversation she barely remembered, that her mother used to keep in the kitchen. Taewon was looking at his screen like he hadn't moved them there. Like they'd always been there. Zoe set the Yongin file on his desk. "The flowers," she said. "Sit down." Taewon. "Zoe." He finally looked up. "Sit down." She sat. And for the first time in 6 years of knowing Lee Taewon, she watched him look for words. "If you're new here and you're already hooked, I want to personally welcome you to Afro Shadow Stories. Do yourself a favor and subscribe right now, because this story is only getting started, and you do not want to miss what happens next." He didn't confess. Not yet. That wasn't who he was, and Zoe wasn't ready to hear it, and the story isn't ready for it either, because this is the kind of love that has to destroy itself twice before it survives. What he said was, "You've been here 6 years. I know how long I've been here. You know this organization better than most people who built it. I know that too. I don't want institutional knowledge walking out the door." Zoe looked at him across the desk. At the flowers she wasn't supposed to notice. At the man who had just told her this was about institutional knowledge while looking at her like she was something he was afraid of losing. "That's not why you keep creating projects," she said quietly. Silence. Taewon. "The Yongin timeline," he said. "Back to the file. Back to control. Walk me through section 3. She walked him through section 3. She stayed another 40 minutes. She answered every question. She was professional and efficient and thorough. And when she finally stood to leave, she picked up the file, tucked it under her arm, and paused at the door. "I'm leaving at the end of next week," she said. "Whether or not there's a project." She didn't look back. But in the elevator, she pressed the button for the lobby and stared at her own reflection in the steel doors and thought about pale yellow flowers and a man who wouldn't say what he meant, and she felt the first crack appear in the decision she'd made. She did not like the feeling. She did not like it at all. Zoe's last official day arrived on a Friday. She came in at 8. Cleared her desk methodically. Transferred the last of her files. Wrote 3 pages of handover notes that were so thorough and so precise that Sun Ae, reading through them, actually looked up and said, "Did you sleep last night?" "I'm always thorough," Zoe said. "This is beyond thorough. This is a woman settling an estate." Zoe didn't respond to that. By 11 she was done. Genuinely done. Nothing left to hand over, nothing left to organize, nothing left to use as a reason to stay. She picked up the single-framed photo she kept on her desk, her mother, laughing at something off camera, wrapped it in a cloth, tucked it into her bag, and stood there for a moment in an empty office that still smelled like her perfume. 6 years. She picked up her bag and walked out. She made it to the elevator before Min-suk appeared beside her with the quiet, sudden presence of a man who had spent years learning to materialize without warning. "He wants to see you," Min-suk said. "I'm done, Min-suk." "I know." He pressed the elevator button for her. "He knows too." A pause. "He still wants to see you." The elevator arrived. Zoe looked at the open doors. Looked at Min-suk, who was staring straight ahead with that expression he used when he was delivering information he'd been ordered to deliver but personally disagreed with. She stepped into the elevator. "Tell him I said goodbye," she said, "and let the doors close." In the lobby, she nodded to the security guard who'd checked her in every morning for 6 years. He stood up a little straighter. "Safe travels, Ms. Bennett." She pushed through the glass doors and walked into the Seoul afternoon and breathed air that had nothing to do with Lee Tae-won in it. She lasted 40 minutes before her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Set her jaw. Let it ring. It rang again. She answered. "You left," Tae-won said. "That's what resignation means. I wanted to speak with you before you left. You had 3 weeks. She kept walking. Didn't slow down. "You spent those 3 weeks manufacturing reasons for me to stay instead of saying whatever it is you actually wanted to say. That's on you." Silence. Tae-won. She stopped at a crossing. "What did you want to say?" Another silence. Longer. The kind that from anyone else would mean they were gathering courage. From him it meant he was calculating cost. "Have dinner with me." The light changed. Zoe crossed the street. "No. As a professional courtesy. 6 years. Goodbye, Tae-won." She ended the call. She stood on the other side of the road and stared at her phone and felt something pressing against the inside of her chest that she absolutely refused to name. Then she called Alicia. "I'm out," she said when Alicia picked up. A scream came through the phone so loud Zoe had to pull it from her ear. Finally. "Oh my God. Okay. Where are you? We are celebrating tonight. I don't want a big thing. I'm not asking what you want. I'm telling you what's happening. Wear something that isn't a work blazer. Be at Sora at 8. The call ended. Zoe looked down at her blazer. Sora was the kind of restaurant that existed in the specific space between too expensive to be casual and too warm to be pretentious. Low lighting, good wine list, the kind of corner booths designed for conversations that weren't meant for other tables. Alicia was already there when Zoe arrived, wearing a dress that announced she had been planning this celebration for longer than Zoe's 2-week notice period. She stood up the second she saw Zoe, grabbed her by both arms, looked her up and down, and then hugged her so hard Zoe felt her spine adjust. "I'm so proud of you," Alicia said into her shoulder. "I just quit a job." "You quit him. That's different and harder, and I've been waiting 3 years for you to do it." They sat. Alicia ordered champagne without looking at the menu. Zoe was halfway through her first glass and somewhere in the middle of explaining the Yongin Project saga when a shadow fell across the table and a voice said, "Alicia. I thought that was you." The man was tall. Broad through the shoulders. The kind of face that was striking without being aggressive about it, strong jaw, easy smile, the particular confidence of someone who had never needed to perform it. He was dressed well but not stiffly. He looked like someone who had decided to be comfortable in his own skin and had then committed to that decision completely. Alicia lit up. "Derek. What are you doing here?" "Client dinner." He gestured vaguely toward the other side of the restaurant. "They're fighting about the bill," I escaped. His eyes moved to Zoe with the natural, unhurried attention of someone who was genuinely interested. "I don't think we've met." "Zoe Bennett." She shook his hand. "Derek Collins." His handshake was direct. No games in it. "Are you celebrating something?" "Her freedom," Alicia said. Zoe shot her a look. Derek smiled. It did something to his whole face. "That sounds like a good story." "It's not that interesting," Zoe said. "She quit a job she should have left 2 years ago," Alicia said, ignoring Zoe entirely. "And she deserves every glass of this champagne." Derek laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that made the table next to them glance over and smile without knowing why. "Well, that genuinely deserves celebrating." He looked at Zoe. "Congratulations." There was nothing loaded in the way he said it. No agenda underneath it. Just a man in a restaurant saying something he meant. It was so simple it almost felt strange. His client emerged from the other side of the restaurant, coats already on, looking for him. He said a quick goodbye, told Alicia they should catch up, looked at Zoe one more time with that uncomplicated, direct attention. "It was nice to meet you, Zoe Bennett." Then he was gone. Alicia waited approximately 4 seconds. "So. Don't. He's been single for 18 months. Alicia. He's a good man. I mean that literally. He is a genuinely good man. Which I know is a concept you've been living without for a while, so let me describe what it looks like. I just left a job today. I'm not. He's going to text me asking for your number," Alicia said simply. "I'm going to give it to him. You can do whatever you want with that information." She refilled Zoe's glass. Zoe drank it. Derek texted 3 days later. "Not anything elaborate. Just, Alicia said you might be open to coffee. I'm asking because I'd like that, not because I was told to. No pressure either way." Zoe read it twice. Then she typed back, "Saturday works." She put her phone down. Picked it back up. Looked at the message. Thought about a man who asked directly and meant it and didn't calculate the cost of every word before he spoke. Thought about pale yellow flowers on a desk. Put her phone down again. He called her on a Wednesday evening. She was in the middle of telling Derek about a restaurant she'd loved in Chicago, standing in her kitchen in socked feet, laughing at something he'd just said, when her phone buzzed on the counter and she glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. She held up one finger to Derek. "1 second. She answered. "Taewon." A pause. A very specific pause. "You have company," he said. Not a question. The background of her kitchen was not silent. Derek had just said something and laughed at his own punchline and the sound carried clearly into the phone. "Is there something you need?" Zoe kept her voice level. Another pause. Shorter. Tighter. "I was calling to discuss the Yongin follow-up documentation. Sun AE has questions. Have Sun AE email me. I'll answer everything." Zoe. "Is there anything else?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something she could hear but not see, pressing against the inside of it. "No," he said finally. That was everything. The call ended. Zoe set her phone down on the counter. Stood very still for a moment. Derek was watching her with that straightforward attention she was still getting used to. "You okay?" "Fine." She turned back to him. Smiled. "You were saying something about Chicago." Derek looked at her for a half-second longer than necessary. Not probing. Just noticing. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm sure." He nodded, easy, unbothered, and picked up the thread of the story. He was like that. No pressure. No second layer to everything. She smiled at something he said and told herself she was fine. Across the city, in a penthouse office where the lights were still on at 11 at night, Lee Taewon sat with his phone face down on his desk and his hands flat against the surface and his jaw set in the particular way it got when he was containing something that did not want to be contained. Min-suk came in without knocking because he was one of the only people alive who could do that. He looked at Taewon. Looked at the phone. Looked at Taewon again. "She has someone," Taewon said. It wasn't a question. Min-suk sat down in the chair across the desk and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that, and because he had learned a long time ago that the most useful thing you could do when Lee Taewon was colliding with his own feelings was simply stay in the room. Find out who he is. Is that a good idea? Taewon looked at him. I'll find out who he is, Min-suk said. The information arrived 48 hours later. Derek Collins. 34. Built a sustainable architecture firm from scratch, currently profitable, no criminal associations, no debt, no complications. Clean in a way that was almost boring to research. Donated to 3 different charities without publicizing it. Coached youth football on Sunday mornings. Min-suk laid the file on the desk without commentary. Tae-won read it in silence. When he finished, he closed the file and placed his hand flat on top of it and stared at the middle distance for a long moment. He's not dangerous, Min-suk offered. I know. So there's nothing to act on. Tae-won said nothing. Tae-won. Min-suk leaned forward slightly. The tone he used when he was about to say something that might get a bad reaction. She left. You didn't stop her. You had 3 weeks to say something real and you didn't. You can't. I know what I didn't do. The voice was very quiet. Very flat. The voice he used when the conversation was over. Min-suk leaned back. The city glittered below the window. 42 floors of distance between Lee Tae-won and the rest of the world, which had always been exactly where he wanted to be. Until now it had never felt like a problem. He opened the file again. Derek Collins. Coached youth football on Sundays. Laughed easily. Asked directly. Uncomplicated. Tae-won closed the file. He picked up his phone. Pulled up Zoe's number. Stared at it for a long moment. He put the phone down. Then he picked it up again. He typed, I need you back in the office. Temporary consultancy. The Yongin transition has created complications that only you can resolve. He stared at the message. He sent it. The reply took 4 minutes. What kind of complications? He looked at that response for a long time. She hadn't said no. She hadn't said yes. She'd asked a question. And Zoe Bennett only asked questions when she was considering the answer. He started typing. And in a way that he could not have predicted and could not have stopped and would not recognize until it was already too late, Lee Tae-won, who had spent 35 years never losing control of a single situation, began losing this one. She told herself she was going back for the money. The consultancy rate Tae-won offered was aggressive in the specific way that told her he'd thought about what number she couldn't say no to and then gone higher. She had bills. She had a career transition that was taking longer than planned. She had exactly the kind of practical reality that made principles expensive. So she was going back for the money. She told this to Alicia on the phone while getting dressed. Alicia was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Zoe. It's a consultancy. 3 weeks maximum. Zoe. It's professional. If you say the word professional one more time I will come to your apartment and confiscate your blazers. A pause. Does Derek know? Zoe smoothed the front of her jacket. Not a blazer. A structured coat, deep burgundy, the kind of thing she wore when she needed to remember she was someone outside of that building. I'll tell him. Before or after you walk back into the lion's den? Alicia. I'm just asking questions, Alicia said, in the voice she used when she was asking significantly more than questions. Zoe ended the call. The building looked exactly the same. She hadn't expected it to look different. She wasn't sure why she'd noticed it at all, except that she'd spent 6 years walking through those glass doors and today was the first time it had felt like a choice. The security guard at the front desk stood up when he saw her. Ms. Bennett. Good to have you back. Temporary, she said pleasantly, and kept walking. The elevator. The 42nd floor. The hallway she could have navigated blindfolded. She walked it differently today and she knew it and she didn't try to stop it. Something in her spine had rearranged itself in the weeks since she'd left. She walked like someone who could turn around. She pushed open the door to the outer office. Sun Ae looked up from her desk and visibly relaxed. Oh, thank God. That bad? He restructured the entire filing system on Tuesday, Sun Ae said, in the tone of a woman describing a natural disaster. Nobody can find anything. Zoe set her bag down. Show me. She spent 40 minutes fixing the filing system, answered 6 of Sun Ae's backlogged questions, and had completely reorganized the project pipeline before she walked the 10 steps to Taewon's office and knocked once. Come in. She opened the door. He was standing at the window. Not sitting behind the desk the way he usually was when she arrived, positioned and ready, controlled and composed. Standing at the window with his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, his back to the door. It was such a small thing. She had seen him with his jacket off 100 times. It shouldn't have registered. It did. You fixed the filing system, he said, without turning around. Sun Ae looked like she was developing a stress condition. She's fine. You restructured the entire filing system on Tuesday. A pause. Something almost like guilt in it, which on Taewon was extraordinary. It needed restructuring. It needed nothing. Zoe sat down in the chair across from his desk, the chair she'd sat in 1,000 times, and pulled out her notebook. Walk me through the Yongin complications. He turned around. She had also told herself, in the days since agreeing to come back, that she was prepared for this part. That she had spent enough time away to have rebuilt the specific internal architecture that made it possible to sit across from Lee Taewon without feeling anything structurally inconvenient. She had genuinely believed this. She updated her belief immediately. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for 3 weeks, the same way, the new way, the way that had no professional distance in it at all anymore, like a man who had decided something without saying it out loud. The Yongin complications, she said again. He sat down. Pulled a file from his desk. Slid it across to her. She opened it. Read the first 2 pages. Looked up. This isn't a complication, she said. This is a standard transition issue. Sun Ae can handle this. Sun Ae doesn't have your familiarity with the client. I can brief her in an hour. The client specifically requested you. Zoe set the file down. Looked at him. He held her gaze with the steady, unreadable composure she'd spent 6 years learning to read, and what she read now was a man who had constructed a very thin argument and knew it and was daring her to dismantle it. Taewon. The rate stands regardless of how long it takes, he said. That's not what I was going to say. I know what you were going to say. She looked at him for a long moment. The office was very quiet. Outside the window, 42 floors of Seoul went about its business, utterly indifferent. 3 weeks, she said finally. I'm billing by the hour, I'm not taking calls after 7, and if you manufacture one more project I will walk out and not come back. Something moved across his face. Not quite relief. Something more complicated than relief. Agreed, he said. She picked the file back up. The thing nobody tells you about returning to something you tried to leave is that everything is the same and nothing is the same, and you feel both of those truths simultaneously until you can't tell which one is real. Zoe moved through the next week with the efficiency she'd built her reputation on. She resolved the Yongin issue in 4 days. She sat in 2 client meetings and said exactly the right things at exactly the right moments. She answered Sun Ae's questions and reorganized the project timeline and did everything she was paid to do. And the entire time, she was aware of Taewon the way you're aware of a sound that's always been in the background of a room and suddenly you can't stop hearing it. He was different. Not performing different. Actually different. She'd catch him in the middle of something and he'd look up and there'd be a half-second delay before the composure clicked back into place, and in that half-second was something she had no language for and wasn't trying to find. On Wednesday he had coffee on her desk before she arrived. Her specific order. Nobody had told him to do it. Sun Ae hadn't done it. It was just there. She drank it. She didn't mention it. On Thursday he cancelled a meeting she'd seen on his calendar for 3 months to sit in on a client meeting she was running. Not to take over. Not to correct anything. He sat in the corner of the room and listened to her work and said nothing and left when it was over. The client, who had met Taewon twice and feared him both times, looked at Zoe afterward with wide eyes. Does he always do that? No, she said honestly. On Friday afternoon she was standing at the window in his office going through the final Yongin documentation when her phone buzzed on the desk. Derek. Still on for tonight? I found that Jamaican place you mentioned. She smiled at the screen without deciding to. Set the phone down. Picked up the next page. Good news? She looked up. Taewon was watching her from his desk with an expression so carefully neutral it was its own kind of answer. Personal, she said. His jaw shifted. Just slightly. Of course. She went back to the document. The room had about 20% less oxygen in it than it had 30 seconds ago. She made it through 2 more pages before she said, without looking up, his name is Derek. Before you have Min-suk spend another 48 hours on a background file. Silence. She looked up. Taewon was very still. The particular stillness she'd learned meant something had landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to. I don't know what you're. I know how you operate. So before Min-suk starts pulling files, his name is Derek Collins, he's a good man, and that's everything you need. The silence stretched. And before you say anything, she said, setting the document down, I want you to think very carefully about whether what you're about to say is something you actually have the right to say to me. Taewon looked at her across the desk. His hands were flat on the surface. His expression was doing something she'd never seen it do, something that looked dangerously close to unraveling. Do I have any rights where you're concerned? He said quietly. The question sat in the room like something physical. Zoe held his gaze. Her heart was doing something inconvenient and she was not going to acknowledge it. No, she said. You don't. She picked up the document. Kept reading. Her eyes moved across the words and absorbed none of them. She left at 6:30. In the elevator she exhaled slowly and told herself she was fine and told herself tonight would be good. Derek had found that Jamaican restaurant she'd mentioned 3 weeks ago, which meant he'd been paying attention, which meant something, which was the kind of thing that mattered. The elevator opened to the lobby. She was halfway across it when she heard her name. She turned. Taewon was standing at the elevator. Jacket on now, the full composure restored, except for his eyes, which were doing the thing they'd been doing for weeks. I need 10 minutes, he said. Taewon. 10 minutes. A pause. Please. In 6 years he had never said please to her. She wasn't sure she'd heard him say it to anyone. She stood in the lobby and looked at the words sitting in the air between them and made a decision she knew was going to cost her something. 10 minutes, she said. He didn't take her back upstairs. There was a small room off the lobby, not an office, not a meeting room, just a quiet space with 2 chairs and a window and none of the architecture of power that his office carried. He'd never used it in 6 years as far as she knew. He stood near the window. She stayed near the door. Say what you need to say, she told him. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that wasn't hesitation, it was precision. He was choosing. I've been watching you leave for 3 weeks, he said, and every time you walk out of that building something in me, he stopped. Started again. I don't have the right words for what I'm going to say. She said nothing. You've been in my life for 6 years and in all 6 of those years I convinced myself that keeping you at a distance was the right decision. That it was protection. For you. Primarily for you. His eyes met hers and stayed. I've recently accepted that I was lying to myself. Taewon. I'm not finished. Not a command. Almost a request. Derek Collins is a good man. I know. I know he is. And I know he's everything I'm not. Stop. And I am standing here telling you anyway because if I don't say it I will spend the rest of my life watching you build something with someone else and knowing I never. He cut himself off. Jaw tight. You matter to me. In a way that I have no framework for and no defense against, and I should have said it before you resigned and I didn't, and I know I don't have any rights where you're concerned. His voice dropped. I know that. I'm not asking for rights. I'm asking you to know. The room was very still. Zoe was aware of her own breathing in a way that meant she was trying to control it. 6 years. 6 years of this man in her peripheral vision, close enough to feel and far enough to pretend. 6 years of keeping herself precise and professional and armored, and now he was standing at a window in a room with no power in it, using words like please and telling her she mattered, and she was standing at the door and her hand was not on the handle and she didn't know when that had happened. Her phone buzzed. Derek. Outside when you're ready, no rush. She looked at the screen. Looked up at Taewon, who had seen her look at the screen and whose face had done something quiet and devastated and controlled all at once. I have to go, she said. He nodded. Once. I know. She opened the door. Zoe. She stopped. Didn't turn around. He doesn't know you the way I do. It wasn't possessive. It wasn't a threat. It came out like the truest thing he'd ever said and the most painful thing he'd ever admitted. Nobody does. She walked out. In the street, Derek was leaning against his car with his hands in his pockets, easy and warm and exactly what she'd told herself she wanted. He smiled when he saw her. She smiled back. And in the back of a mind she was desperately trying to quiet, 6 years of knowing and being known sat like something she couldn't put down. The consultancy was supposed to end after 3 weeks. It was now week 5. Zoe had not examined why she kept finding reasons to extend it. The Yongin client had new questions. The transition documentation needed a second review. There was a filing issue that Sun AE technically could have resolved alone but resolved faster with Zoe's input. Every reason was legitimate. Every reason was also thin enough to see through if you held it up to the light, which she was not doing. What she was doing was showing up every morning and doing excellent work and leaving every evening at 6:30 and going home to a life that was genuinely good and genuinely hers and genuinely missing something she refused to identify. Derek had been clear about his feelings from the night they met. No games, no ambiguity. When he finally asked her out properly, Zoe had been honest with him. She liked his company, she liked him, but she wasn't sure she was ready. Instead of walking away, Derek had looked at her steadily and said, then give it a real chance. If you get there, you get there. If you can't move past whatever is holding you back, I'll respect that. But I'm not walking away from this over uncertainty. She had agreed. Partly because he made sense. Partly because she was tired of standing still. Partly because having somewhere to look other than backward felt like exactly what she needed. 6 weeks in, the Jamaican restaurant had quietly become theirs. They were at their usual corner table, good food between them, the easy rhythm of two people who had learned each other's patterns, when Derek set his fork down and looked at her. Talk to me, he said. I'm talking to you. You've been somewhere else all evening. No edge in it. Just honesty. I'm not pushing. I'm asking. Zoe looked at him across the table. At the man who had shown up exactly as advertised every single day since they started this. Who had never once made her feel pressured or chased or managed. She thought about a small lobby room. A man at a window. Words that landed somewhere she hadn't prepared for. I'm here, she said. Derek looked at her for a moment. Then he picked his fork back up. Okay. He reached across the table and took her hand. She let him. And she sat with the distance between where his heart was going and where hers currently lived, and told herself she was still trying. What she didn't know was that 2 days later Alicia would call with the energy of someone carrying information too large for her body. "He has a ring," Alicia said the second Zoe answered. Zoe stopped walking. "What?" "Derek. I saw it. He asked my opinion weeks ago." "Zoe, he's planning to propose." The street continued around her. She had agreed to a trial. She had been honest about her uncertainty. Derek knew she wasn't fully there yet, and he was moving toward a ring. "Say something," Alicia said. Zoe said nothing because what she felt wasn't happiness. It wasn't even surprise. It was the specific dread of a woman watching a good man love her more completely than she was currently capable of loving him back. "I'll call you back," she said. She walked back to the office. She didn't tell Taewon. She also couldn't stop thinking about it, which meant it was somewhere on her face when she walked into his office that afternoon to drop off the final Yongin documentation, because he looked at her from behind his desk and said nothing for 3 seconds and then said, "What happened?" "Nothing. Zoe. Final Yongin documents." She set them on his desk. "Everything's in order. Sun Ae can manage the rest." He looked at the documents. Looked at her. "You're ending the consultancy." It was always temporary. He was quiet. She recognized the quality of the quiet. It was the kind he used when he was deciding whether to say the true thing or the safe thing. "Is this because of what I said?" She met his eyes. "No." "Is it because of him?" "It's because the work is done." She picked up her bag. That was the arrangement. "Zoe. Don't." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." He said nothing. She left. In the elevator she pressed the button and stood very still and thought about a ring she hadn't seen in a box she'd never touched belonging to a man who deserved a full yes from a woman who was completely present. She thought about whether she could be that woman. She was still thinking about it when the elevator opened to the lobby and she stepped out and pushed through the glass doors and turned left toward the parking structure where her car was, the route she'd taken every evening for 5 weeks, head down against the late autumn wind. She heard the footsteps when she was halfway through the structure. She registered them a second too late. It happened fast, the way bad things always do, no warning, no build-up. Just a hand on her arm and a hard turn and she was facing a man she'd never seen before with the specific dead-eyed expression of someone who'd been paid to be here. "Don't scream," he said, in Korean. Her heart hammered. "Let go of me. You're going to come with me." A second man materialized from behind a car. Very quietly. She'd worked for Lee Taewon for 6 years. She knew what it meant when men looked like this. She also knew, from 6 years of proximity to exactly this world, that screaming was not actually a bad idea. She screamed. What happened next happened in about 11 seconds. The first man yanked her forward. There was a sound she would later describe as brief and decisive. The first man went down. The second man turned and had just enough time to register what he was turning toward before he went down too. And then Taewon was there. Not security. Not Min-suk. Him. In his jacket and his composed expression except his eyes, which were not composed at all, which were doing something she had never seen them do, wild and dark and frightened in a way that had nothing controlled about it. He grabbed her by both arms. "Are you hurt?" Are you hurt?" His hands moved to her face, her jaw, her shoulders, checking with a thoroughness that was completely unself-conscious, no calculation in it, just a man's hands on someone he was terrified of losing. "I'm not hurt," she said. "I'm fine." She stopped. He was shaking. Lee Taewon, who she had never seen rattle, who had sat across from armed men without blinking, who had received news of threats against his life with less emotional response than most people gave to a delayed coffee order, he was shaking. Just slightly. Just enough. She put her hand over his. He went still. If you're watching this and you're not subscribed yet, do it now. Because this story is not slowing down. He drove her home. She didn't argue. She sat in the passenger seat of his car while Sol moved past the window, and neither of them said anything for a long time, and the silence had a different quality to it than any silence they'd shared before, stripped of everything, no performance on either side, just two people sitting with what had just happened. Who were they? She said finally. A message. His voice was flat. Back under control except at the edges. From someone who wanted my attention. They'll have it. Are there more? No. Definitive. Not anymore. She looked at his hands on the wheel. Steady now. She was the only person who knew they'd been shaking. You were already watching me, she said. Yes. Since when? Since you resigned. She absorbed this. Not weeks. Months. Every morning, every evening, every dinner with Derek she thought was entirely her own, quietly covered. Not him personally. His people. But his orders. His need to know she was safe even when she no longer belonged to his world. She should have been angry. She filed that away for later. He pulled up outside her building and stopped the car, and they sat in the dark for a moment. Thank you, she said. Don't. Taewon. Don't thank me for that. His jaw was tight. Don't make it something small. She looked at him. At the profile she knew well enough to draw from memory. The jaw she could read like text. The hands that had been shaking 11 minutes ago and were now completely still. She thought about Derek's ring in a box somewhere. Derek, who was good and real and completely present. Derek, who deserved someone who wasn't sitting in another man's car in the dark, unable to make herself get out. I should go in, she said. I know. Neither of them moved. You said nobody knows me the way you do, she said quietly. Yes. That's not fair. No, he agreed. It isn't. It's not fair because you never tried. You knew me and you kept me at a distance and you chose your control over. She stopped. Her voice had done something unexpected and she steadied it. You don't get to say that and then expect me to. I'm not expecting anything. He turned and looked at her and his face had nothing left in it that wasn't real. I said it because it's true. I'm not saying it to win anything. I've already lost. The words sat in the car like something physical. Have you? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, with the deliberateness of a man dismantling something he'd spent years building, he reached across and tucked a single strand of hair from her face and let his hand rest against her jaw, barely touching, like a question. She didn't move away. Zoe. Her name and his voice had always sounded different than it did anywhere else. She'd noticed it years ago and refused to examine it. Tell me to stop. She should have. She didn't. His forehead dropped to hers. Still barely touching. Giving her every exit. She closed the last distance herself. The morning came in gray and still. Zoe lay on her back and stared at her own ceiling, her curtains, her apartment, and listened to the sound of Taewon breathing beside her and felt the full weight of the night settle over her like something she couldn't lift off alone. She had not planned this. She was a woman who planned everything. Who accounted for every variable, closed every loop, mapped every exit before she walked into any room. And somehow, between a parking garage and a car and a small room with no power in it, she had walked directly into the one thing she had spent 6 years building walls against. He was already awake. She knew because she knew. Neither of them spoke. I need you to go, she said finally. A pause. Okay. Not because, she stopped. Started again. I need to think. I can't do that with you here. I understand. He sat up. Reached for his shirt. No argument, no negotiation, no manufacturing of reasons to stay. Just a man who had finally learned to hear her. He was dressed in under 2 minutes. She stayed where she was, sheet pulled to her shoulders, watching the ceiling. He stopped at the bedroom door. "The pill," she said, before he could speak. Practical. Even. Because she was always practical, and even when everything else was falling apart. "I need emergency contraception." She heard him go still. Not long. A second. Maybe less. "I'll get it," he said. "There's a pharmacy on the corner." "Thank you." She listened to his footsteps. The front door opening. Closing. She lay in the quiet and breathed. The pharmacy was 3 minutes from her building. Taewon found what he needed in under a minute. He stood in the pharmacy aisle holding the box and looking at it and thinking about nothing except the specific, suffocating terror of a man who had spent 6 years keeping his distance and had finally, in one unguarded night, let her all the way in. And now she was already pulling back. He could feel it. The way she'd asked him to go. The way she'd said she needed to think, and he knew what Zoe's thinking looked like. He knew where it led. He knew she would build the wall back up brick by brick with both hands and call it clarity, and by the time she was done there would be no door left in it anywhere. He looked at the box. He stood there for a long time. When he walked back out it was not with what he'd gone in for. He hated himself before he reached her building. He hated himself when he filled the glass of water. When he walked back to her bedroom doorway and held it out. When she reached for it without hesitation, without a single flicker of doubt, with the complete, unexamined trust of a woman who had never once been given a reason to look closer. "Thank you," she said. He watched her take it. He said nothing. He let himself out. Zoe spent the following weeks building the life she had resigned to build. She took on 2 freelance clients. She reorganized her apartment. She called her mother twice a week and let herself be known by a voice that had loved her before she had any opinions about anything. She ran in the mornings and cooked actual meals and read the stack of books that had been sitting on her nightstand for 6 months. She did not contact Taewon. She was not punishing him. She was not testing him. She simply needed to locate herself outside of his orbit before she could figure out what the night had meant and what, if anything, came next. She called Derek on the 4th day. She sat on her kitchen floor. She didn't plan to be on the kitchen floor. She just ended up there the way you end up places when a conversation is too heavy to have standing up, and called him and told him the truth in its essential form. Not the details. Just the truth. Derek listened to all of it. When she finished the silence stretched long enough that she checked the call was still connected. "I think I knew," he said finally. His voice quiet and even. "I kept thinking if I was just patient enough, consistent enough," he exhaled. "I'm not angry with you, Zoe. I want you to know that. You have every right to be. Maybe. But I knew what I was walking into." A pause. "You were always honest about where you stood. I just chose to believe I could shift it." Another pause. Longer. "I hope it works out the way you need it to." The kindness in it was almost harder than anger would have been. "I'm sorry, Derek," she said. "Genuinely. I know you are." He was quiet for a moment. "Take care of yourself." The call ended. She sat on the kitchen floor until her legs went numb, and then she got up and made tea and stood at her window and watched the street below and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd done to a man who had deserved better. She carried it with her. Not as punishment. As truth. The first sign was tiredness. Not the tiredness of a busy week or a disrupted sleep pattern. A different kind. The bone-deep, illogical tiredness of a body redirecting its resources without informing the person living in it. She put it down to the stress of the past weeks. The emotional weight of everything that had shifted. Reasonable explanations for a reasonable woman. Then the nausea started. Low grade. Present mostly in the mornings. Absent enough that she could ignore it for several days before it became impossible to ignore. She ran through the logical explanations systematically. Something she'd eaten. A minor bug. Stress manifesting physically. All plausible. All checked off one by one. She lay in bed on a Thursday morning staring at the ceiling while her body did the quiet, insistent thing it had been doing for 2 weeks and let the final explanation arrive without rushing it. She was late. She hadn't registered it until that moment. The past weeks had been too disorganized, too emotionally loud. But lying still in the Thursday morning quiet, she counted back and felt the number land and lay with it for exactly 1 minute before she got up, got dressed, and went to the pharmacy. She bought the test almost calmly. The way she bought anything she needed. She was less calm 20 minutes later. 2 lines. She sat on the edge of her bathtub and looked at the small plastic thing in her hands and felt the world rearrange itself around her in a way she had no protocol for. The pill had failed. These things happened. She knew that. Effectiveness rates were not guarantees. She had been careful and the pill had simply, quietly, not worked. Her body had made a decision independent of everything she'd planned. She sat there for a long time. Not crying. Not panicking. Just sitting with the enormous, life-altering fact of it before she let her practical mind anywhere near it. She was going to be a mother. She sat with that first. Everything else could wait. She told Alicia before she told anyone else. Alicia sat across the kitchen table, both hands around her cup, and looked at Zoe with the expression of a woman choosing very carefully what to say. "Are you okay?" she said. "Still working that out." "The baby." "I'm keeping it." No hesitation. "That part is decided." Alicia nodded. She knew Zoe well enough to know when a thing was settled. "Then the other part. I have to tell him." "Yes." "I don't." Zoe stopped. Looked at her hands. "I don't know how he's going to take it, Alicia. We're not together. This wasn't planned. She stopped again. "I don't know if he even wants children. I don't know what this does to his world. I don't know what he's going to say." Alicia looked at her carefully. "Are you scared?" Zoe was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said honestly. "Not of him. Of the answer." She called him the following evening. He answered before the second ring. "I need to see you," she said. "Somewhere quiet. Can you meet me tomorrow?" His voice had something careful in it. "Yes. Whatever you need." She named a small restaurant she'd passed once and remembered for no particular reason. Somewhere with no history between them. She arrived first. Sat with her hands flat on the table and her back straight, and the composure she'd spent years building assembled around her like armor. He walked in and found her immediately. Crossed the room and sat down across from her and looked at her with that complete, undivided attention that had never once in 6 years made her feel examined. Only seen. She didn't make him wait. "I'm pregnant," she said. The stillness that moved across his face was not what she had braced herself for. She had prepared for control. For the composed, calculating man who managed information. For a version of distance that would confirm every reasonable fear she'd carried into this room. What she got was something unguarded and enormous that he made no attempt to manage. His hands went still on the table. His eyes stayed on her face, and in them was something she hadn't seen before in 6 years of knowing him. "Are you all right?" he said. First thing. Not a strategy. Just the first thing. Yes. I'm okay. The pregnancy. Are you, physically? I'm fine. She met his eyes. I'm keeping it. I want you to know that up front, and I want you to know that I'm not here asking anything from you. I can do this on my own, and I will if that's. Zoe. Quiet. Definitive. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him. I mean that, he said. Completely. She had prepared herself for every version of this conversation. She had not prepared for that. She had built her entire adult life on the principle that people showed you who they were if you paid attention long enough. Not who they claimed to be. Not who they were on their best day. Who they were when the situation got uncomfortable and the performance got expensive. She paid attention. Taewon showed up to her second doctor's appointment without being asked. She was in the waiting room scrolling through nothing on her phone when the door opened and he walked in and sat down beside her with the calm, unhurried ease of a man who had made a decision and arrived. No announcement. No explanation. Just present. She looked at him. You didn't have to. I know, he said. The nurse called her name 11 minutes later. She stood. He stood. She looked at him once and turned and walked in, and he followed without making it a question. In the car afterward she held the scanned photo in both hands and looked at the small impossible shape on it and felt something so large and tender move through her that her eyes did something she didn't authorize. She didn't try to hide it. Taewon looked at the photo. Then at her face. He didn't try to fix it or frame it or move past it. He sat in the quiet with her and let her feel what she was feeling without putting a wall around it. That was the moment the first brick came loose. She didn't tell him. But she registered it. The weeks that followed had a texture she hadn't prepared herself for. He learned her pregnancy schedule the way he'd always learned everything about her, completely, quietly, without making a performance of it. He knew which evenings exhausted her and which ones didn't. He knew when she needed company and when she needed silence. He knew, somehow, without being told, that Wednesday nights were harder than other nights, and he never asked why, and he always called on Wednesdays. She left a key on the kitchen counter. Not a conversation. Not a declaration. Just a key. He used it to let himself in when she fell asleep before he arrived and used it to lock up when he left before she woke. She told herself it was practical. Alicia called it something else. You're falling, Alicia said, on a Sunday afternoon when Zoe had spent 15 minutes describing a conversation she and Taewon had about something entirely inconsequential and had found herself unable to stop talking about it. I'm being careful. You described the way he reheated your food like it was a personality trait worth admiring. He reheated it exactly right. That's not a small thing. Alicia looked at her. Long and knowing. Are you happy, Zoe? The question sat there without decoration. Zoe thought about Wednesday phone calls and scanned photos and a key on a kitchen counter and a man who had learned to show up without making her feel cornered by it. I'm getting there, she said. Alicia smiled. Just slightly cautious around the edges. Good, she said. You deserve to get there. One evening in her 7th month she was sitting on the kitchen floor when he arrived. Not distress. Just the floor. The chair had become impossible and the tiles were cool and sometimes the floor was simply the correct answer to a body that had stopped negotiating. He stood in the doorway and looked at her. Don't, she said. I wasn't going to say anything. You were thinking it. I was thinking you looked comfortable. He took off his jacket. Hung it over the chair back. Then sat down on her kitchen floor beside her without a single beat of hesitation. No deliberation. No self-consciousness. Just down. She looked at him. Lee Taewon, the most feared man in South Korea, on her kitchen floor in a dress shirt. Something cracked open in her chest and came out as laughter. Real laughter. The undignified kind that started somewhere deep and had no performance in it. She laughed until her eyes watered and he sat beside her with the small, genuine smile she had learned was the rarest thing he owned, and she thought, clearly, for the first time without immediately talking herself out of it, that she was in serious trouble. Later, when the food was finished and the kitchen had gone quiet and she was leaning against the cabinet with her eyes half closed, he said, "I need to tell you something." She opened her eyes. His tone had changed register. "Okay," she said. He was looking at his hands. "That morning. After everything. I should have said more before I walked out." He stopped. "I left without saying what I meant and his jaw tightened. A long pause. Then the composure came back, subtle and familiar, closing over whatever was underneath it. "I need you to know that none of what's happened since has been obligation. Not a single day of it." She looked at him. He had started to say something different. She had felt the shape of another sentence in the space before the one that arrived. Something closer to the truth. Something that would have cost him more. But she didn't pull at it. She wasn't ready to hold whatever it was. "I know," she said quietly. "Do you?" "I'm starting to," she said. And she meant it. If you're this deep into the story and you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because what comes next will destroy you and you need to be here for it. She was 32 weeks when she came to return his building keys. His property manager had given them to her weeks ago for a storage unit he'd arranged for the baby's furniture. She'd been meaning to return them for days. Simple errand. No emotional charge to it. In and out. She took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The corridor was quiet. Sun A's desk was empty, lunch hour. She walked toward his office and registered before she reached the door that he wasn't alone. Two voices. His and Min Suk's. The door was pulled almost closed. Not fully. The kind of gap that happens when no one expects anyone to be coming. She raised her hand to knock. Min Suk's voice came through the gap first. "She's 32 weeks, Taewon." A pause. "How much longer are you planning to wait?" She held her hand still. Taewon's voice. Measured. "It's not the right moment. There won't be a right moment. There's only the moment before she finds out on her own and the moment after. You need to choose which one you'd rather live with." A silence. "She's happy," Taewon said. "We're building something real. You're building it on ground she doesn't know is unsteady." Min Suk's voice was low but clear. The voice of a man who had been holding something a long time and had stopped being able to hold it quietly. "I told you not to do it. I told you the morning after when you came back without what you'd gone to get. I'm telling you now." The keys in her hand. "She took what she believed was that pill," Min Suk continued, "because she trusted you completely. She has no idea you swapped it. She has no idea this pregnancy was something you had any hand in engineering. And every single day she spends believing otherwise is a day you are lying to her." The floor didn't move. Everything else did. She stood in the corridor outside Lee Taewon's office and felt the word, swapped, travel through her like something cold and irreversible, touching everything it passed on its way through and leaving none of it intact. The pill on the nightstand. The glass of water. "I'll handle it." The 1 second of silence that had been 1 second too long. Him standing at her front door with his hands in his pockets in the early morning. Walking to his car. Not looking back. She had thought it was restraint. She stood in the corridor and understood now what it actually was. Taewon's voice again, quieter. "I was going to lose her." "So you decided for her," Min Suk said. "You decided she didn't get a choice in whether she stayed. You decided that your fear of losing her was more important than her right to leave." A pause. "That's not love, Taewon. That's control wearing love's face." Silence. "Every time she's looked at you these past months and started to believe in you," Min Suk said, "she's been believing in a version of this that isn't complete. You owe her the complete version. Before that baby comes. Before she's in any deeper. She lowered her hand. The keys were still in it. She set them down on the small table outside his door. Without sound. She turned around. She walked back to the elevator. She pressed the button and stood in the corridor and looked at nothing while 32 weeks of Wednesday phone calls and kitchen floors and scanned photos and cautiously, terrifyingly earned hope rearranged themselves in front of her into their actual shape. He had not changed because he finally understood what he'd been doing. He had shown up because he had built the reason to show up. He had not been becoming someone different. He had been managing the outcome of a decision he made on a morning she had handed him her trust like it was nothing and he had used it like a tool. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. She pressed the button for the lobby. She did not look back. She didn't go to him that day. She went home. She sat on her living room floor with her back against the sofa and her hands in her lap and she breathed. In. Out. Slowly. The way she did when something was too large to process standing up. She didn't call Alicia. Not yet. This was too big for another person's voice in it yet. She needed to sit with it alone first. Needed to be precise about it the way she was precise about everything that mattered. So she assembled it. Piece by piece. The way you build a case file. The way you lay evidence out in chronological order and let the pattern show itself without forcing it. The morning after. Him saying he'd go get it. The front door opening and closing. The wait. Him coming back with a glass of water and a pill and the specific expression of a man who had just done something he couldn't undo. The 1 second of silence when she'd asked him. Just 1 second. She had noticed it and filed it away as nothing. Because she had trusted him. Because 6 years of trusting him had trained her not to look for reasons not to. The pill. The glass of water. Her own hand reaching out and taking it without question. Taking it the way she'd taken everything he'd ever given her, completely, without inspection. Then the weeks after. The missed period. The tiredness her body had been politely signaling for days before she listened. The test on the bathroom counter. 2 lines. Her sitting on the edge of the bathtub telling herself the pill had simply failed because these things happened and she had no reason to believe otherwise. No reason. Because he had given her no reason. Then the doctor's appointments. The Wednesday calls. The key on the counter. The kitchen floor. Every quiet, specific, consistent act of a man she had started, carefully, against her own better judgment, with every defensive wall she owned still technically in position, to believe in. All of it. She laid every piece of it out in front of her and looked at the shape it made. She put her forehead down on her arms on the floor and cried. Not immediately. Not until the assembly was complete and there was nothing left to examine and the full shape of it was sitting in front of her without any room for reinterpretation. Then she cried. The quiet, contained kind that had nothing performative in it. Just grief moving through a body that had nowhere else to put it. She cried for the woman who had sat in a pharmacy buying a test assuming a pill had failed. She cried for the woman who had handed a man her trust like it cost nothing. She cried for 32 weeks of Wednesday phone calls that she had started, slowly and against every instinct, to need. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she sat up. Wiped her face. Looked at nothing for a long moment. She picked up her phone. Put it back down. Picked it up again. She did not call Alicia. She called him. 3 rings. Zoe. Are you home? She said. A pause. Something careful in it. Yes. Don't go anywhere. She ended the call. He opened the door before she knocked. He had heard the elevator. He had been standing in his hallway waiting for it and she understood, looking at his face when the door opened, that some part of him already knew. Not the specifics. But the quality of her voice on the phone had told him enough. She walked past him into the apartment. He closed the door. She stood in the middle of his living room with her coat still on and her bag still on her shoulder, and she turned and looked at him, and he stood by the door and looked back at her, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she said. Not a question. She already knew the answer. She asked it because she needed to hear what he did with it. He said nothing. Which was its own answer. "I was outside your office today," she said. "The door wasn't fully closed. I heard you and Min Suk." Something moved across his face. Not surprise. Something worse than surprise, the specific expression of a man watching the thing he feared most arrive before he was ready for it. "Zoe. Don't." Her voice was quiet. Completely level. No shake in it. "Don't say my name like that right now. Just stand there and let me say what I came to say." He closed his mouth. She looked at him across the room. At the man she had known for 6 years. The man she had organized her professional life around, built her competence against, kept her feelings for in a box she never opened because she had been smart enough to know that opening it led nowhere good. The man she had finally, at 32 weeks pregnant, started to believe was real. "You went to that pharmacy," she said. "You stood in that aisle and you made a decision. Not in a moment of passion. Not without thinking. You stood there and you thought about it and you chose." Her voice stayed even. "You came back to my apartment and you handed me a glass of water and something that wasn't what I asked for, and you watched me take it." He didn't move. "I said thank you," she said. "Do you remember that?" "I said thank you." Something in his face broke. Small and precise. Like a crack in glass that hasn't shattered yet. "I trusted you," she said. "I have trusted you since the first year I worked for you. Through everything. Through every terrifying thing I watched you do and every complicated thing I knew about you and chose to stay beside anyway. I never, not once, had a reason to question what you gave me." She stopped. Breathed. "You knew that. You used it. Zoe. I'm not finished." Still quiet. Still level. "I'm not angry that I'm pregnant. I want you to hear me say that clearly. This baby is mine and I want it, and that's not what this is about." She looked at him steadily. "I'm angry because you took my choice. I asked you for something specific and you decided your fear was more important than my right to make my own decision. You didn't trust me enough to fight for me honestly. You didn't believe that if you actually tried, if you showed up and said what you meant and pursued me the way someone who loves another person pursues them, that I might have chosen you." Her voice dropped. "So instead you chose for me." The room was completely still. "You didn't trust me to stay," she said. "So you trapped me instead." Taewon stood by his door and said nothing and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face in 6 years. Not in boardrooms. Not in the face of threats. Not in any situation she had ever watched him navigate. He looked undone. Not dramatically. Not the way it happened in stories. Just a man whose last defense had been removed and who had nothing left underneath it. "Yes," he said. One word. No qualification. No explanation wrapped around it to soften the shape of it. Just yes. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I was terrified." His voice came out rough. Not the controlled, measured voice she knew. Something underneath that. "You resigned and you walked out of my building and I stood in my office and felt something I have never felt in my life. And I didn't know what to do with it because I have never," he stopped. Started again. "I have never in my life wanted something I couldn't manage. Something I couldn't control the outcome of. You were leaving and Derek Collins was exactly everything I wasn't, and you were going to build a life that had nothing to do with me in it, and he exhaled. I stood in that pharmacy and I made the worst decision of my life and I have hated myself for it every single day since. That's not enough, she said. I know. You hating yourself doesn't give me back the choice you took. I know, he said again. Quieter. You showed up, she said. These past months. All of it. The appointments. The calls. The kitchen floor. Her voice wavered for the first time. She steadied it. Was any of it real? He looked at her. All of it. How am I supposed to believe that? I don't know, he said honestly. I don't know how to ask you to believe anything I say right now. I don't have the right to ask you for anything. She stood in the middle of his living room and looked at him and felt the specific, devastating exhaustion of a woman who had been right to be cautious and had let her guard down anyway and had paid the price anyway. I needed to be chosen, she said. Do you understand that? Not trapped. Not engineered into a situation where leaving became complicated. I needed someone to want me enough to actually fight for me. Honestly. In the open. With the possibility that I might say no. Her eyes were bright. She didn't let them spill. That's all I ever needed from you. He crossed the room. She stepped back. He stopped. I know, he said. From where he was standing. Not crossing the distance she'd put between them. I know that. And I am telling you, not to ask for forgiveness, not because I think it changes anything, I am telling you that I have never in my life wanted anything the way I want you. Not a business. Not a war. Not anything I have ever built or taken or held. His voice broke on the last word. Barely. But she heard it. And I destroyed it. I know I destroyed it. Because I was too much of a coward to simply stand in front of you and fight. The room was very quiet. Zoe looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had just said the truest thing he'd ever said to her. Months too late. I need to go, she said. He nodded. Once. He didn't move toward the door. Didn't reach for her. Didn't manufacture a reason to make her stay. For the first time in the entire length of their story, Lee Tae-won let her walk toward the door without doing a single thing to stop her. She stopped with her hand on the handle. She didn't turn around. I don't know what comes next, she said quietly. I don't know what I'm going to feel in a week or a month. But right now I need you to give me distance. Real distance. Not the kind where you have Min-suk watching my building. Not the kind where you call on Wednesdays because you know they're hard. A breath. Real distance. Because I need to figure out what I actually feel when you're not in the room. A long silence. Okay, he said. She opened the door. She walked out. Behind her, she heard nothing. No footsteps. No voice calling her back. No door opening again. Just silence. The particular silence of a man standing in his own apartment, alone, finally, completely, letting go of the one thing he had never known how to hold correctly. She took the elevator down. She walked out into the night. She put one hand on her stomach. The baby moved. She stood on the pavement outside his building and felt her child move inside her and breathed the cold night air and told herself she was going to be all right. That she had survived more than this. That she was Zoe Bennett and she did not break. She told herself all of this. Then she walked to her car and drove home and let herself fall apart for exactly as long as she needed to, and not 1 second longer. He stood in his living room for a long time after she left. Not moving. Not reaching for his phone. Not doing the thing he had done every other time she had walked away, manufacturing the reason, creating the project, engineering the circumstance that brought her back. He just stood there. The apartment held her still. The faint trace of her perfume. A glass she'd used sitting on the counter because he hadn't moved it and wasn't going to. The particular quality of a space that knows it just held something important and is quietly adjusting to its absence. Min-suk called at 11. Taewon looked at the phone. Let it ring. It rang again at 11:15. He answered. She came to the office, Min-suk said. I know. A pause. How bad? Taewon looked at the glass on the counter. She heard everything. Silence stretched between them. She asked for distance, Taewon said. Real distance. Are you going to give it to her? He had never in his life given anyone real distance when he wanted them close. He had always found the angle. Always located the lever. Always identified the precise pressure point that moved a situation in the direction he needed. Yes, he said. Min-suk was quiet for a moment. That might be the first completely right thing you've done in this entire situation. I know. The call ended. Taewon stood in his apartment and began the hardest thing he had ever done. He did nothing. The nothing was enormous. He cancelled the standing order with his security team. Removed himself from the information loop that had been quietly feeding him updates on her movements for months. Deleted the contact at her doctor's practice. He sat with the silence that followed and let it be exactly as large as it needed to be. Days passed. A week. 2. Min-suk came to his office on a Thursday evening and sat across from him and said, She's due in 6 weeks. Taewon said nothing. I'm not telling you so you'll do something, Min-suk said. I'm telling you so you know. I know. She has Alicia. She's not alone. Good. He meant it. Min-suk looked at him carefully. You look terrible. Thank you, Min-suk. I mean it. You look like a man who hasn't slept since she walked out. Taewon looked at the window. At the city below that had never once looked like anything other than something to manage. I used to believe that if I controlled enough variables I could guarantee any outcome I needed. He paused. Zoe was the first thing I couldn't figure out how to control. So I cheated. His jaw tightened. I have been paying for it since the morning I did it. I will keep paying for it. And if the price is that she decides she's done, that's the price. I don't get to negotiate it down. Min-suk was quiet for a long moment. That, he said finally, is the first time I've heard you talk about her without trying to solve it. Taewon said nothing. It's a start, Min-suk said. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in early spring, Zoe went into labor. Alicia was at her apartment within 20 minutes, arriving in a coat thrown over her pajamas, keys already in hand, firing questions that Zoe answered with her eyes closed and one hand pressed to the small of her back. Hospital bag? By the door. Phone charger? In the bag. Have you called? Alicia. Right. Going. The labor was 9 hours. Not easy. Not the soft-lit, compressed version of the experience. Real and physical and demanding in a way that reached down to something ancient in her body. Somewhere in the middle of it she stopped thinking about anything except the immediate reality of what her body was doing, the most extraordinary thing it had ever done. She thought about her mother, who had done this alone in a country that wasn't hers. She thought about the women who came before her who had done harder things with less. She held Alicia's hand and breathed and worked, and at 7:42 in the evening her daughter arrived, furious and immediate and fully herself from the very first second, and Zoe held her against her chest and felt something shift in the center of her that she understood would never shift back. Hi, she whispered. The baby stopped crying. Just like that. Like she recognized the voice. From the corner of the room Alicia made a sound that was not crying. I'm not crying, Alicia said. I can see that, Zoe said. She held her daughter and felt the weight of her and thought about everything that had brought them to this room and decided, not as a grand resolution, just as a quiet fact, that whatever came next, this was enough. This right here. This was the foundation everything else would be built on. She named her Nari. She hadn't planned it. It had simply arrived one evening while she was sitting in the half-assembled nursery surrounded by flat-pack furniture that was taking significantly longer than it should have, and the name presented itself quietly like something that had always been decided. She didn't examine it too closely. Nari Bennett. The baby seemed to approve. New motherhood was not the version she had encountered in other people's stories. It was exhausting in a way that reached the cellular level. It was learning the specific vocabulary of a person who communicated exclusively in urgency. It was 3 a.m. on a Wednesday sitting on the living room floor with a baby who had been crying for 40 minutes for no clear reason, both of them in the dark together. "You're okay," Zoe said quietly. "I've got you." The baby settled. Alicia came every day for the first 2 weeks. Her mother flew in from the States and stayed for 10 days and cooked food that tasted like home and held Nari while Zoe slept and asked exactly 0 questions about the father, which was its own kind of love. Life assembled itself around its new center. It was good. Complicated but good. Taewon sent nothing. No message. No flowers. No intermediary with a carefully worded note. Nothing. She had asked for real distance and he had given it, and the silence was so complete it had its own presence in the room sometimes. She would put Nari down and sit in the quiet and feel the shape of his absence the way you feel a missing tooth, not always, not constantly, but precisely and unmistakably when her attention landed on it. She told herself it was what she'd asked for. She told herself she was glad for it. On Nari's 3rd week she ran into Min-suk. Not arranged. Not manufactured. She was leaving the pharmacy when he was arriving and they looked at each other and both stopped. He looked at Nari in the carrier against her chest. Something in his face opened briefly. "She's beautiful." "Thank you." He nodded. Started to move past her. Then stopped. "He dismantled everything," he said quietly. "The night you walked out. The surveillance, the security reports, all of it. Gone." He looked at her directly. "Whatever you're building right now is genuinely yours. No one is watching. No one is reporting back." He paused. "He doesn't know I'm here. This isn't a message from him. I just thought you deserved to know." Zoe looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you, Min-suk," she said. She walked home slowly. Sat in the nursery with Nari sleeping on her chest and thought about a man who had spent years manufacturing every possible reason to stay close and had chosen, for the first time, to do the opposite. Not as a gesture. Not as a strategy. Just as the one honest thing he had left to give her. She sat with that for a long time. It was a Sunday morning when she packed the baby bag. Not because the pain had gone. It hadn't, not completely, and she wasn't going to lie to herself about that. Not because she had arrived at full forgiveness. That was a longer road than 6 weeks and she knew it. But she had been sitting with the truth of it and the truth was layered. The truth was that her daughter carried his jaw and his stillness and the particular way she had of looking at things like she was learning them completely. The truth was that she had watched what real distance looked like on a man who had never before chosen it and it looked like the hardest thing he had ever done. The truth was that there was a difference between punishment and honesty, and the honest thing, the thing she had always demanded of herself above everything else, was that she wasn't done. Not with the anger. But not with him either. She picked up Nari. Strapped her into the carrier. Put on her coat. She drove to his building. She knocked. A long pause. He opened the door. She had thought about what his face would do when he saw Nari for the first time. She had played it out in her mind across quiet evenings and 3 a.m. floors and long drives to nowhere particular. She had tried to prepare herself for it. She hadn't come close. He looked at the baby against her chest and something moved across his face that had no name she knew. Not a single identifiable emotion. Everything at once. Months of silence and distance and staying away collapsing into one single moment standing in a doorway. His eyes came up to hers. She held his gaze. "I'm not here because everything is resolved," she said quietly. "I'm not here because what you did stopped being what it was." She paused. "I'm here because she exists. And because you are her father. And because I've been watching what it looks like when you actually let someone make their own decision without putting your hand on the scale." She looked at him steadily. "That's why I'm here." He nodded. "Once. A man accepting terms he has no right to negotiate." She held Nari out. He took her. The most feared man in South Korea. The man who had built an empire on the principle that control was the only reliable protection against loss. The man she had watched remain composed in the face of things that dissolved lesser people entirely. He held his daughter for the first time and came apart completely. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The way a building settles. The way something that has been held rigid for too long finally releases. Nari looked up at him with the serious, searching expression she had inherited directly from his face. He looked down at her. And Zoe stood in the doorway and watched Lee Tae-won, every wall down, every defense gone, every version of himself he had ever constructed dissolved, meet the one person in the world he hadn't engineered. The one person who simply arrived. And looked at him like he was exactly enough. Some loves don't survive the ways we ruin them. And some do. Not because the damage disappears. Not because the people involved become different people. But because two people decide, separately, honestly, with full knowledge of what it cost, that what's on the other side of the ruin is worth walking toward. This was not the end. This was only the beginning of the harder, realer, truer thing. If this story pulled you in even once, don't leave without subscribing, drop a comment telling me whose side you're on right now, hit like so YouTube pushes this video to more drama lovers, and share it with that friend who's obsessed with mafia romances and impossible love stories.
He stepped back from the door. She followed him inside. Nari decided she was hungry, not as a suggestion, as an announcement. The full-throated, non-negotiable declaration of a person who had no interest in the emotional weight of the room and required immediate attention. Tae-won looked down at her with the expression of a man who had just been reminded, correctly, that the universe did not revolve around his problems. Zoe was already reaching into the bag she'd brought. Here. She handed him the bottle she'd prepared before leaving her apartment. Support her head a little more on the left. She tilts that way. He adjusted. Offered Nari the bottle. Nari accepted it with the focused, businesslike energy she brought to eating, and the room that had been holding two people, and everything unsaid between them suddenly had something else in it entirely. Something ordinary and immediate, and completely indifferent to the weight of the moment. Tae-won looked at his daughter drinking her bottle with absolute commitment. Something in his face shifted into something she didn't have a word for. "She's very decisive," he said. "She got it from both of us," Zoe said. He glanced up. She held his gaze. And for a moment, brief and unannounced, something almost like a smile moved between them. Not quite, but close. The shadow of what used to be easy between them before everything became what it became. Then it passed, and the weight came back. When Nari finished, she went immediately and completely to sleep the way she did everything, fully, without compromise. Tae-won held her and didn't put her down, and Zoe didn't suggest it, because the sight of him holding their daughter with the careful, concentrated attention of a man learning something that mattered more than anything he had ever learned was not something she was going to interrupt. They sat in the quiet. The apartment was warm. Nari breathed the slow, deep breath of someone with absolutely no concerns. "What were you going to do?" Zoe said finally. He looked at her. "If I never came back," she said. "If I never knocked on your door, what were you going to do?" He considered the question. Not quickly. The way he considered things that deserved to be considered properly. "Stay in whatever space you allowed me," he said. "Be present for Nari however you were comfortable with. And carry everything else alone." "You weren't going to reach out?" "No. Not at all. No." He looked up. "You asked me for real distance. I gave it to you. I was going to keep giving it to you for as long as you needed it. She sat with that. That must have been difficult, she said. Not sarcastically. Genuinely. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, he said simply. And it was the right thing. Those two facts existed at the same time, and I let them. She looked at him for a long moment. When I was in the corridor, she said. Outside your office. Listening to you and Min Suk. She paused. Do you know what the worst part was? He said nothing. Waiting. It wasn't the betrayal itself, she said. The worst part was the weeks before it. When I had stopped bracing for something to go wrong, and had just let myself be in it. The Wednesday calls and the appointments, and all of it. She kept her voice from breaking. And then I stood in that corridor, and every single moment of that happiness rearranged itself. And I couldn't tell anymore what had been real, and what had been the outcome of something you engineered. The room was very quiet. I need to tell you something about that, he said. She waited. Every moment was real, he said. Everything I felt in those months. Every call, every evening. Every time I sat beside you and thought that I would do anything not to lose this. None of that was performance. None of it was management. His voice was rough. What I did that morning was wrong. I know that with a clarity I cannot fully express. But the man who showed up afterward, the man who was terrified every single day that you would find out, and he'd lose everything before he had a chance to show you who he actually was. That was not a man playing a role. He paused. That was just me. Afraid and trying and doing it better than I had ever done it before, even though I had already done the worst thing. He held her gaze. I need you to know that the happiness was real. Whatever you decide to do with everything else, that part was real. She looked at him for a long time. How do I know? She said. You don't, he said. Not with certainty. Not yet. He didn't flinch from the honesty of it. Trust isn't a thing I can hand you. I know that. It's a thing that either builds over time or it doesn't. And I don't have the right to tell you which it'll be. He looked down at Nari sleeping against his chest. All I can tell you is that I'm not afraid of the time it takes. I'm not afraid of doing this slowly. I spent years being afraid of losing you and making that fear into everyone else's problem. I'm done with that. Zoe sat in his apartment and felt something she hadn't fully expected. Not a wall coming down, not a dramatic shift, but something quieter. The specific feeling of a truth landing in the correct place. The way a thing sounds different when the person saying it is no longer trying to use it for something. I was in love with you, she said. For a long time. You knew that? Yes. Did you know it while it was happening, or did you figure it out after? He was quiet for a moment. I knew it, he said. I told myself I was protecting you by keeping the distance. I was protecting myself. He paused. By the time I understood the difference, you had already resigned. She nodded slowly. Can I tell you something? She said. Yes. I am still angry, she said. I want you to know that. I'm not sitting here because the anger is gone. I'm sitting here in spite of it. She met his eyes. But I have also been sitting in my apartment for weeks watching Nari sleep and thinking about what I actually want my life to look like. Not the safe version. Not the version built around protecting myself from the possibility of being hurt. She breathed. The real version. He waited. The real version has you in it, she said. That's the truth I kept arriving at no matter which direction I came from. It has you in it. She held his gaze steadily. Not because I'm not furious. Not because what you did was acceptable. But because I am done letting fear make my decisions. You don't get to have done that to me and also be the reason I spend my life choosing the smaller thing. Something moved across his face. She kept going. So here's what I'm offering you, she said. Not a clean slate. Not forgiveness handed over like it costs nothing. What I'm offering is the chance to show me. Consistently, without prompting, without engineering. Show me who you are when you're not afraid of losing me. Because I have never actually seen that person. She looked at him. I want to see that person. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked up. Thank you, he said. For coming. For giving me the chance to be. He stopped. For giving me the chance. Don't thank me yet, she said. You haven't done anything yet. I know. The doing is the part that matters. I know that too. The corner of his mouth moved. Just slightly. I intend to be very thorough about the doing. And there it was, small, quiet, unexpected. Something that was not quite a smile from him, meeting something that was not quite a smile from her. In the specific language that had always existed between them and had survived everything they had put it through. Nari slept on. The evening settled around the three of them. And in the quiet of that apartment, Without declaration or ceremony, without a moment that announced itself as significant, something began. Not perfectly, not without the damage still present in the room, but honestly, which was the only way it was ever going to last. 6 months after Zoe appeared at his door with Nari, Taewon had established a routine so steady she could set a clock by it. Tuesday and Thursday evenings he arrived at 6 on the dot to pick Nari up. Saturday mornings at 9. He was never late. He never canceled without reasonable notice. He showed up with exactly what Nari needed because he had been paying close attention since the beginning. The right formula, the soft toy she refused to sleep without that he had quietly purchased a spare of after she left it at his apartment one evening. He did not overstep. He did not push past what Zoe was comfortable with. When she said goodnight at the door, he said goodnight and left. When she needed to change the schedule, he rearranged without complaint. When Nari got sick during one of his evenings, he handled it calmly, kept Zoe informed with clear updates, and brought Nari home the moment the fever rose. He did not make it dramatic. He did not use it as an opportunity to be needed. He just managed it the way a father manages something that is his responsibility to manage. He was present in all the ways that mattered and absent in all the ways she needed. By the end of those 6 months, Zoe understood something she hadn't when she knocked on his door. She had gone there hoping to see the beginning of change. What she was watching now was change that had already quietly been underway for longer than she realized. A year later, he asked her to dinner. He called on a Monday evening and said, "I would like to take you to dinner on Saturday. Just the two of us. I am asking because I genuinely want to, and I understand completely if you need more time." She held the phone for a moment. "I'll ask Alicia if she's free to watch Nari," she said. The restaurant he chose was warm and small, and exactly the kind of place she would have chosen for herself. Not designed to impress. Designed to be enjoyed. When she sat across from him without anything professional between them, and without the weight of unresolved things pressing down on the evening, she felt the unfamiliar lightness of it. It was slightly careful at first. Then she said something that made him laugh, a real laugh, full and unguarded, and the carefulness dissolved. They talked for 3 hours without noticing the time passing, through cleared plates and refilled glasses, and staff who moved patiently around them. He drove her home, walked her to her door. "Stop there. Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for asking," she said. She went inside. Alicia was in the living room with Nari already down for the night. She looked up when Zoe walked in, took one look at her face, and said nothing for a moment. "Well," Alicia said finally. "Don't," Zoe said. "I haven't said anything. You were about to." Alicia pressed her lips together in the specific way of a woman containing a significant amount of opinion. "I'm just sitting here." "Thank you for watching her," Zoe said. Alicia said, collecting her things with a small smile she was not bothering to hide. 2 weeks after the first dinner, on a Tuesday afternoon, Taewon was on the living room floor with Nari, building something with soft blocks that Nari kept dismantling with great satisfaction the moment it reached any reasonable height. He rebuilt it each time without complaint. Nari picked up a block, studied it, then looked up at him with the serious expression she used when she was about to say something important, and said, "Appa." Just like that. Casually. The way she said everything. Like it was information she had always had, and was simply choosing to share now. Taewon went completely still. Nari held the block out to him, apparently satisfied, and waited for him to resume building. He took the block. His hands were not entirely steady. Zoe was in the kitchen doorway. She had heard it. She watched him sit there on her living room floor holding a soft block, and understood exactly what was happening inside him, and said nothing and gave him every second of the moment he needed. He didn't leave the room. He didn't look up. He just placed the block carefully on top of the tower. "Thank you," he told Nari, in a voice that was very quiet and not quite level. Nari immediately knocked the tower over. 18 months later, the Sunday dinner started. It happened naturally. He would bring Nari back in the evening, and Zoe would have cooked because cooking settled her mind after a long week. And one Sunday she looked at the amount of food she had made and said, "Stay and eat." He stayed. It became the rhythm of their Sundays without either of them formally deciding it. He would arrive with Nari. Dinner would be on the stove. She would say stay, and he would. They would eat, and Nari would make a significant mess of everything, and one of them would clean her up while the other cleared the table, and the whole thing felt so ordinary it almost startled her the first time she noticed it. One Sunday evening, he was at the door to leave, and she was holding a sleeping Nari against her shoulder. She looked at him standing there in his jacket, and said, "You don't have to rush off." He stilled. "Sit for a while," she said simply. "She's already asleep. There's tea." He took his jacket back off. She settled Nari in her crib, and came back to find him making the tea exactly as she liked it, because he had learned it without being told. They sat at the kitchen table, and talked about nothing important for 2 hours. When he finally left, she stood at the window, and watched the street below, and thought about the specific ordinary comfort of an evening that had asked nothing from her except that she be present in it. She had not felt that in a very long time. 2 years later, Min-suk sat across from Tae-won in his office, and studied him for a long moment. "You look different," Min-suk said. "Do I? You look like a man who has stopped being afraid." He paused. "It is genuinely unfamiliar on you." Tae-won was quiet for a moment. "I am still afraid of things," he said. "I am afraid of letting her down. I am afraid of reverting to who I was when everything felt like something to be managed." He looked at the window. "But I am not afraid of losing her, because I am doing something wrong. That is a different way to live." Min-suk looked at him. "It suits you," he said. Tae-won said nothing. But he did not disagree. 3 years later, Nari was sitting between them on the sofa one evening, when she looked up from the book Tae-won was reading to her, and pressed her small hand flat against his chest, and then flat against Zoe's, and then nodded to herself like she had confirmed something important. "Same," she said. Neither Zoe nor Tae-won spoke for a moment. "Same," Nari repeated, with the complete certainty of a 3-year-old who had worked something out and was not interested in being questioned about it. Tae-won looked at Zoe over the top of Nari's head. Zoe looked back at him, and in that look was everything neither of them needed to say out loud. 3.5 years after the night she knocked on his door, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, he sat beside her on the sofa and placed a small box on the cushion between them. She looked at it, then at him. "I know I don't deserve to ask this," he said. "I want you to know I understand that going in. I am not asking because time has passed, or because things are good between us, or because it is the next logical step." He held her gaze without flinching. "I am asking because loving you is the most honest thing I have ever done. Because I want to spend every day choosing to be the man you deserve. Not out of fear. Not out of anything except wanting to." He paused. "You can say no. You can say not yet. Whatever you decide, I will accept completely, and nothing between us changes." Zoe looked at the box sitting between them. She thought about the past few years. About all the quiet, consistent ways he had shown up without announcement or applause. About the person he had become when nobody was watching. She picked up the box and opened it. The ring inside was not the largest or the most impressive. It was simple and exactly right in the way that only happens when someone has been paying very close attention for a very long time. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. He let out a breath that told her how much he had been holding. He took the ring and placed it on her finger, and she looked at it there, and felt the full quiet weight of a decision made with completely open eyes settle into something permanent in her chest. From the hallway, Nari appeared in her pajamas holding her toy rabbit, having apparently decided bedtime was optional. She looked at her parents sitting on the sofa, looked at the ring, looked at Tae-won. "Appa," she said, with the tone of someone who had opinions about him being there at this hour. "Yes," he said seriously. "It's me." Nari considered this, then climbed onto the sofa between them and made herself comfortable. Zoe caught Tae-won's eye over the top of Nari's head. He looked back at her, and the smile that passed between them was so full and so quiet and so completely theirs that no one else in the world would have been able to read it. They married the following October, small and exactly as Zoe had always wanted. The people who mattered and nobody who didn't. Alicia cried from the moment Zoe appeared in her dress, and spent the rest of the afternoon insisting her eyes were simply irritated. Min-suk stood near the back with his arms folded and the careful expression of a man who was deeply moved and had decided that was private information. Nari was 4 years old. She had chosen her own dress after rejecting several others, and wore it with the energy of someone who understood the day was important even without being able to explain why. She held her small bouquet with both hands and enormous concentration. When Tae-won saw Zoe walk toward him, his face did the thing she had stopped trying to name because she already knew exactly what it meant. She had known for a long time. She walked to him and stood before him and looked at this man who had loved her imperfectly and learned to love her right, and felt nothing except the quiet absolute certainty of being exactly where she was supposed to be. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. And everything that followed was the easiest thing in the world. A year after their wedding, on a Sunday morning, the three of them were at the breakfast table. Nari was 5 and had developed precise opinions about the order in which food should be eaten and was explaining these opinions at length to anyone who would listen. Taewon was listening with the complete serious attention he gave to everything she said. Zoe was watching the two of them over her coffee. The morning light came through the window. The table between them held the remains of breakfast and Nari's current drawing project and a toy rabbit that had somehow made it from the bedroom. The apartment was warm. Nari paused her explanation to take a large bite of toast, looked at her father, looked at her mother, then went back to the drawing as though satisfied that her audience was still intact. Taewon looked at Zoe. She looked back. Nothing needed to be said. This was the life they had built. Not because it was easy or because the road had been clean or because either of them had arrived here without damage, but because they had chosen it every single day with full knowledge of what the choice carried. Nari held up her drawing. "Look," she said. They both looked. It was a house with 3 people standing in front of it, drawn with the specific confidence of someone who knows exactly what she sees. "That's us," Nari said. "Yes," Zoe said. "That's exactly us." If this story pulled you in even once, don't leave without subscribing. Drop a comment telling me whose side you're on right now. Hit like so YouTube pushes this video to more drama lovers. And share it with that friend who's obsessed with mafia romances and impossible love stories.